Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Warren Simons, who is the editor-in-chief of Valiant Entertainment. Warren, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Warren, I'm going to start with what I think is probably the most obvious question. What is it exactly that an editor-in-chief does?
This is a good question. Primarily, Valiant is a company, and we publish somewhere between 7 to 11 books every month. And each of those books are in a shared universe. So what an editor-in-chief does is helps guide the project, basically helps make sure that the books are working in tandem with each other while projecting sort of the short-term and long-term vision for what the editorial line will be. This includes recruiting talent, recruiting writers, recruiting artists, working with the writers and artists on the stories, working with the editors on the stories, working with our executives on the stories, working with our marketing and sales department to make sure that we have assets so that they could sell the stories that we're putting together. Really helps sort of maintain the editorial side, the quality of it, so that we're able to put out hopefully what are the best books in the market month in, month out. So we may not be as big as Marvel and DC or some of the other companies, but we like to think that pound for pound, our books are as good as anything that's being published today.
So it's a combination of an administrative and creative position, and I guess because you are looking at the bigger picture, you can make sure that if you have Quantum and Woody, let's say, that an event that happens in their book is going to resonate in another book because it is that shared universe.
Yeah, you know, it's really sort of trying to take a look at where the books might be going and how the stories that are happening in those books might enhance the content coming up in the future as opposed to detract from it. Continuity itself is a great component of the Valiant universe, and it's a great thing, but it's frequently, it can be used as a crutch. For example, the first time Spider-Man fought the Green Goblin, it was a pretty great story. The second time Spider-Man fought the Green Goblin, it was probably a great story. The 25th time he fought the Green Goblin, if the story is just about Spider-Man fighting the Green Goblin on their 24th adventure, it's going to collapse on itself. It's no longer going to be interesting. The thing that's great about Peter Parker or Spider-Man is that he's a 16-year-old kid who's a bit of a jerk, doesn't stop a robber from when he has the chance, and as a result of that, his uncle dies. And that's a character that's sort of born out of tragedy. And at the core, that's who Peter Parker is. If you take that away from him, he's just a guy who's got web shooters and is flying around New York City. And there's something awesome about that, but when you combine him, he's one of the greatest characters in comic book history. And part of the challenge that the editors and writers of Spider-Man, or really any comic, face is that to continue to tell fresh new stories every time out, so that you're not just sort of collapsing into the continuity. For example, we have 2 books. One of them is, we publish 9 to 11 books every month. One of our books is called Harbinger. In the first issue of Harbinger, or the second issue of Harbinger, we set something up that we also set up in the first issue of Bloodshot. And those two, around the first year after publishing, around issue 12, we had an event called Harbinger Wars, which is where Bloodshot came head-to-head with Harbinger. So what we try to do is build out stories where we can seed things so that in time it will create a more robust tapestry of the broader universe without necessarily being dependent on continuity to do so. I realize that's like a 7-minute answer, so let me know if that all made sense.
Well, it does, especially when you look at a company like Marvel or DC that you mentioned continuity becoming a crutch, where DC felt like they couldn't tell a story in a single month because it would impact something that happened 50 years ago. So as a result, they do Crisis on the Infinite Earths. And then they sort of get into that event mindset where every year they seem to be doing a continuity sweeping and changing what's going on. Rather than taking the characters like you're alluding to, taking a character like Peter Parker, or in your case, Harbinger or Faith, and telling a story that's compelling because of the impact it has on a person that we can relate to rather than a set of powers. So, you know, I'm imagining it's a very difficult balancing act going from just simply what's the event that's going to happen in the story and kind of getting the right people who are going to understand the characters so that the events in the story and the character kind of go hand in hand. And I think maybe that's what you were saying is kind of the more important part of continuity, is how the characters grow rather than, you know, the history that we have to just check off on the boxes.
Yeah, I think as long as you're telling compelling new stories or doing your best to do that, it's the right place to start. I think when you begin to collapse into the continuity itself and you're trying to figure out, what happened in issue, 126 and how is that going to affect issue, 275, and what happens also is the readership shrinks, so that the number of people who can understand that story have to be on board since this to this to this to this. So you're at this point in time now where if you're not telling good, clean, accessible stories, it's going to be much more difficult for a new reader to understand what's happening. And that's really, one of the main things that we try to do at Valiant is to make every issue as clean and accessible as possible. We don't always succeed, but we always try. So, our goal is to really make sure that you can hand a comic to, for example, my brother who doesn't read comic books, or a person walking down the street, and they can at least understand what the story is so that you can start at start. So I feel like that's really an important part of our medium, which has sort of gotten away from itself a little bit over the last couple of years. But when you take a look at the real masterpieces of our medium, Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, Mouse, you go on and on, but they're all clean, accessible stories. Someone can step in. It doesn't matter that Batman's 55 years old or 60 years old, because the story is about a man who's returning to his job. And that's something that all of us can relate to. It's about someone aging. It's about, your arch rival throughout your life. So those are the components which are universal themes, which we try to tap into with the stories that we're telling, as opposed to necessarily being dependent upon a story that's come before us.
And when we talk about books that are accessible, I believe it was, I forget exactly who said it, but everyone's book is their, it could be somebody's first.
Yep.
So you have to make the comics accessible. And I do know that a number of books for another publisher I find very difficult to get into, because they seem to be stretching the stories out into these year-long story arcs that are really sort of designed to be put together in a trade paperback form after the 12 months are up. Rather than, this month I'm going to pick up the story and I'm going to know what happened leading up to this point so I can just get into the story. It seems to me that's what Valiant is trying to do, is to make that book, if it's your first book, you'll be able to, catch on and enjoy the ride rather than...
Yeah, we do. And even when we have broader events like the Book of Death event, which we had last year, we try to make it accessible and we try to limit the scope of it. So Book of Death was a universe-wide event, but it was in 4 books in a 4-issue limited series. Then we had 4 sister books that tied in. So the commitment was minimal. If you wanted to sort of have a broader understanding of what was happening, you could read everything, but we didn't make that 4-issue limited series prohibitive to understanding if you only read those 4 issues. So accessibility is really key. It's really something that we strive for, and telling great stories is the other one. Luckily we have some of the best writers and artists in the industry right now: Jeff Lemire, Robert Venditti, Joshua Dysart, Matt Kint. The list goes on and on and on. Fred Van Lente. And we have people who are really committed to doing the best books out there. No one here really treats it like it's the 4th or 5th most important thing that they're working on. We really get the all from our writers and artists. Jody Hauser, who just launched Faith for us. Rafa Roberts, who's about to launch Archer and Armstrong for us. So whether they're veteran writers who've been doing this for a decade, or whether this is their first mainstream published superhero comic book, we don't mind. We just try to find people who want to tell great stories and who are excited to be here.
So let's talk about attracting top talent, because traditionally the smaller companies, the independents, aren't able to attract the bigger names I guess when they're at their peak, because well, traditionally they haven't had the resources to pay somebody the top dollar. But as the industry starts to change, it seems like a lot of creators are choosing to work for a smaller publisher because they get to tell stories that maybe work a little easier in terms of being a creative person rather than working with a property that is owned by a corporation. And is that sort of the mindset of a lot of your creators, that they choose to come to work for Valiant because it's an opportunity to tell stories rather than push a product?
I think so. I think when you see what Jeff Lemire is doing with Bloodshot, or what Matt Kint is doing on Ninjak, or I feel lucky as the EIC because the list goes on and on. But or what Robert Venditti is doing on EXO, it gives we really want our creators to create. We're hiring our writers and our artists to come in and to show us what they can do and to really bring a nice right hook to the property. We're not here so that they can execute the status quo, but sort of put a new coat of paint on it, but leave it the same. We really want to have fun. We really want to mix things up. And that's really sort of what the tradition of Valiant has been, back to when it was founded, I think in the late 80s and, and exploded in the early 90s. it really was a company that innovated and sort of turned tropes on their head. If you take a look at that first Harbinger arc that came out in, I think, 1990, someone's going to make fun of me for not knowing exactly, but um, it's really very cutting edge stuff, even if it was published today. If you take a look at the stuff that Barry Windsor Smith did with Archer and Armstrong, it's almost a Python-esque deconstruction of religion, and it's a wonderful parody. And Barry's, of course, one of the most fantastic artists ever graced our medium. So the tradition is to continually do stuff which is innovative and which is not necessarily we don't have to answer we don't have to make quarterly earnings. We don't have to answer to a multinational conglomerate. It's really a small group of people who are really dedicated to telling great comics, and I think that's kind of why we've had such a good response. And I think that's one of the reasons why the creators have come, is because they have the opportunity to flex their wings in a work for hire environment, which I think is a little bit rare right now.
Well, you talked about the history of Valiant. I remember during the 90s when everybody and their mother, it seemed like, had their own comic imprint, and most of them are gone. A few of them are still around, and Valiant's one of them. That ability to be around for 20, 25 years, that says a lot about the quality of the books. And I recall in the 90s reading, I mentioned before, Quantum and Woody, which was sort of a fun adventure. There were a lot of humorous pieces in there, and there was the goat. So as we start to look and see, I mean, you've got fans who have been reading your books for 20 years and fans who are just kind of coming into the books now, and the characters still seem fresh. And so how do you keep your editorial staff sort of mindful of the history and the new readers, and how do you sort of oversee keeping characters fresh? And I know we've kind of talked a little bit about that, but you can just kind of maybe get a little bit into a specific example or something.
Yeah, I'm lucky to have a really incredibly great crew of editors and co-workers, and the challenge really is to stay hungry and to stay ambitious. I'm really proud of the Faith book that we just launched with Jody Hauser and Francis Portello and Marguerite Sauvage, its creative team. That's a great example of the team working together. The editor of that book, Tom Brennan, suggested Jody as a writer, I think almost a year ago. And then in San Diego, I had the opportunity to sit down with Jody and talk about Faith and what the book might be. And, she turned in some pitches that were great. And, everyone wants to continue to be ambitious and to outdo what we did last month. I think that's one of the keys is, although I feel like we've had a great amount of success to date, we don't want to sort of rest on our laurels and, put our feet up and say, a job well done. We're always trying to make sure that next month is better than last month. And I think the thing that we do, whether that's, one of our editors like Kyle Anchukowitz, bringing in great cover artists like Tula Lotte or Ryan Bodenheim, or working with Tom, or working with my colleague, the CEO, Dinesh Shamdasani, and talking story with him. I think what we're always trying to do is just continue to concentrate on making the page great. And if the page is great, the book will be great. And if the book is great, the trade will be great. And if the trade will be great, hopefully the run will be great. So I think if you try to step back and manage the entire universe at once, you're going to have a little bit of problems. You're going to bite off a little bit more than you can chew. Whereas if you just try to concentrate on each individual issue and trying to make that as strong as possible, and really taking a sense of pride in the work, and also honoring the medium, really honoring. I was listening to a good podcast the other day, and I think it was between Bill Simmons and the former Chicago Bulls coach Tom Thibodeau, and he was talking about how some of the guys show up for camp really in shape, and because they have such an amazing respect for the game and the history of the game. So I think as long as you have really, we try to impart that and really have a respect for, that Jack Kirby picture behind you, the magnificence of Kirby and the New Gods and the craziness of it. But, we walk in the footsteps of Titans, and, we try to, have a real reverence and respect for what's come before us, and to, not just mail it in because it's got to get out the door and we have to do 22 pages every 28 days. And, that production cycle can be very intense, but, it's sometimes just about taking a step back and catching your breath.
So let's talk, you mentioned the book Faith, and I haven't read the book yet, but I've been reading the press about it.
It's good. You should check it out.
Now, it seems it's a fantastic concept, and I believe the readers are responding because I understand you've gone to your third print run of that.
Yes. I think we had the fastest third print in the history of comics or something along those lines.
So could you tell us a little bit about Faith for the folks watching?
Sure. Faith is a character who was created about 25 years ago. She's was part of the Harbinger team during their initial incarnation back in the day. When we began republishing in 2012, we launched the Harbinger book as our second book, and Faith was a part of it. And Faith is sort of the optimistic heart of the Valiant universe. She's sort of someone who believes in good and believes in justice, but believes in nobility, and she's always rallying the troops and saying, we can do this, we can get this done. And she always believes that you can sort of do right and still, she's not jaded, you know. You don't have to go far to find a grizzled killer in the pages of in a comic these days who, you know, really doesn't want to kill but has to. And, you know, it's a tough choice. And he heads to the bar after to drown his sorrows in whiskey. Faith is not that. You know, Faith doesn't kill. Faith believes in right. She believes in justice. She believes in helping people. She believes that people can change. And I think that that's why she struck such a nerve with consumers and with readers, because it's such a breath of fresh air in our medium today. So, you know, she lights up the page whenever she's on it. And, you know, we just launched the book last month, and it's been really well received, and we couldn't be happier with it.
You know, you make a great point about the I guess the lack of optimism in a lot of mainstream comics. And I know I was a big DC reader, and Superman was my favorite character. And seeing the last Superman movie just really depressed me. It's one of the few times I wanted to walk out of a theater, but then I said, but then I won't see how bad the ending is. It was a tough choice, and I still regret the one that I made, which was to stay. But it's a very negative universe that they're putting on film. There's very little optimism. And to see a character with optimism in the pages of a comic, it's almost like finding, you know, a jaguar in, you know, Alaska. It's just very rare. You're not going to find that. So it seems like readers are ready for that sort of optimism, and we see that with the Supergirl television series, where they're getting a lot more optimistic with the way they're telling the story in bright colors and everything. And, you know, one of the most unique things about Faith is a lot of the press coverage is focused on her appearance, which is different from a lot of other female characters in comics who are generally, I guess, a very Jim Ballant style of artwork. But Faith is different.
Yeah, the thing about Faith that we've had a lot of response. She doesn't look like every other hero, as you mentioned. And what we've tried to do with her and with really the entire universe is to build a universe that's a little bit more realistic with you know, with what you might see outside your window. You know, when we're done with this interview, we're going to walk outside, or you're going to go to class, and, you know, I'm going to stick my head in the computer and do 12 hours more of work. But, you know, when we are outside, what we do see is people who have all different shapes, sizes, races, colors, genders, ethnicities, you know, sexual orientations, and that's just the world we live in. So the Valiant universe has always been in a position where we try to reflect that. And Faith is one of those characters who reflects it. The thing is, it's not what the book is about, it's just who she is. And we feel like that's another reason why it's been well received. Because it's just who Faith is. And, you know, if you know, she looked like that but was a grizzled killer who, you know, decided to go drink at the bar after murdering someone, I don't think it would have the same, you know, effect. So I think it's really the job that Jody did with the book, and Francis and Marguerite. And Jody's high concept is kind of brilliant. You know, Superman's one of my favorite characters also. You know, I love Superman, love Batman, love a lot of the DC characters. And Jody came up with the idea that if Superman is in the Justice League, but also has a solo book, or if Captain America is in the Avengers, but also has a solo book, then that's what Faith is grown up reading. And she's a big fangirl, big comic fan. So she's going to do the same. So she goes and she tries to get a job at a newspaper, but since newspapers are in so much trouble right now, the only place she could get a job is writing listicles at like a website. So she's writing like these gossip listicles, like, you know, you won't believe what they were caught doing and stuff like that. And she doesn't like her job, and her boss is terrible. So it's kind of updated and modernized for the current environment. So we think that's another reason why it's doing so well.
Now, again, in your role as editor-in-chief, I'm sure you're aware of a lot of the demographics of your readers, and I'm sure you try and reach as many readers as possible. And are you noticing that there's a shift in the traditional, I guess, male readership to be more, I guess, equal among the genders? That more women are reading comics, and is that something that you're focusing on while you're putting together a creative team or the next title?
Not really. We've definitely noticed that there's definitely been a change, especially you see it at the conventions. It's fantastic. I'm so happy to see it. The more diverse a body is, the stronger it is. So, I'm super happy to see an influx of more readers and definitely seeing more content that's reflective of that. But I don't think that you have to target that. I think if you tell a great story, that will be broadly appealing, regardless of who the protagonist or the antagonist is. So I think, again, what we try to do is just focus on story and make sure that it's a really compelling, great story, and not try to build something that is specifically targeting someone or a group, because when you do that, it tends to not work. You know what I mean? It can often come across as contrived, or, a little bit like Poochie the dog in The Simpsons, skateboarding and playing guitar. And so we try to just make everything organic. And Valiant, I'm lucky because Valiant's always been an extremely diverse universe. We've always had a large number of characters who are from across the spectrum of race, ethnicity, class, blah, and so on. So we have a lot to get to. It's just a matter of finding spots in the publishing schedule to get to, because it's very crowded. So we want to give everything its space to breathe.
Well, let's talk about Poochie for a second, because it's funny because Valiant really became popular in the 90s, and the 90s had its own aesthetic. I mean, Superman with a mullet, of course, is one of the tropes that we hear about. So a lot of the comics of Valiant, because Valiant sort of exploded during those boom years rather, how do you keep the company relevant, and characters that were so closely associated with the 90s, how do you make those characters relevant now in the 2000 teens?
It's a great question. I think one of the things is, I worked at Marvel for 7 years, from 2002 to 2009, and I had the opportunity to work on a ton of the best characters ever created in the history of our media. Thor, Daredevil, Iron Man, Iron Fist, Elektra, the list goes on and on. And what you see in the genius of those characters, just like with Superman or Batman or Green Lantern or Flash, is that the core concepts driving those characters is so strong that, like you're saying about Superman, regardless of whether it was, business upfront party in the back, mullet 90s, or if it was, the 1939 version, where he's running around breaking people's guns, and he's kind of a little bit more of a political anarchist. Or the Alan Moore stuff from the 80s, which is just absolutely brilliant. I love that stuff, the Swamp Thing stuff. So the core concepts driving those characters is so smart, and it has such universal themes that I think that it has a real broad appeal, almost on an innate level. And I think that a lot of the Valiant characters possess that as well. When you take a look at Archer and Armstrong, Armstrong's a mortal drunk. He likes to drink wine. He's been around for 6,000 years, but is a never-do-well, and always winds up messing up his relationships. And you have Archer, who's a kid who was raised in a creationist theme park to believe that Armstrong's his enemy, and he's going to kill him. And then the two meet. That's straight out of Barry's concept from and the themes that he's tapping into there about religion and love thy neighbor, and the best and the worst that religion has to offer. These are things that are stretched beyond our medium, and just like Exo Manowar's a character who was a Visigoth, who grew up under the oppressive heel of the Roman Empire, gets abducted by aliens, goes up to space, returns home to seek vengeance on those who wronged him, to discover that 2,000 years have passed, and now he's a man out of time. These are great stories, and those characters help propel themselves. And as long as the stories are relevant, I feel like those characters, the internal strength will help propel them along. It was one of the things that I really dug into when I was deciding whether or not to join Valiant. And reading about the themes and the stories was really very compelling, and I think that's one of the real keys.
So I see we have about 3 minutes left, and I was just wondering, because we hear a lot about people wanting to get into comics. So I was wondering how you got into the industry, and how, if somebody wanted to come to Valiant to work, what would they have to do to get your attention?
Well, I applied for a job on Monster.com and Marvel, believe it or not. And after about 6 months of interviewing, I got the job. So that's how I broke into the industry. But I was always a fan of it from when I was growing up as a kid, from, when I was a super cool 10-year-old reading comics. So that's how I broke in. The great thing about comics is that really anyone can do it. I'm sure you have I don't know how many people are in your studio right now, but I imagine it's a couple. You got the sound guy, the film guy, or whatever. You got your set, you got yourself. So, there's a curve that there's a level of requirements to get into TV or to get into film, or to get into. But there's not for comics. If you can go home right now and write and draw your own comic and put it online, or go head over to Kinko's and Xerox 100 of them, or print 500 of them. You don't have to start off writing X-Men for Marvel, or, writing Batman for DC. So, if you want, the great thing about our medium is that anyone can do it. If obviously you have to have enough skill to compete with, the big guns that we have. But, there's a low entry point, a low threshold to get into it if you choose to take that route. So, what I really encourage everyone to do is don't try to explain to Marvel how to fix Captain America. Don't explain to Valiant how to fix X-O Manowar. I have an idea of how to do this if it's broken, and I'm sure they do as well. What you should do is do something, create your own character, or publish something with their character that shows, what your voice is, or what you do with that character, so that the editors there can get an understanding of what your voice is. That's the most important thing. And don't if you're trying to if you're trying to get into a company, try to do something more than just put together a script. Most editors are underwater, and the last thing they're going to do is read a 22-page script from a writer they've never met before. But if you hand them a 10-page comic or a 20-page comic, they might read that. So that's another tip that I give. And be aggressive. I was just reading, I think Stephen King in his book on writing well talked about how he had those long construction nails from construction sites, the ones that are like a foot, and he filled up 2 of them with rejection letters. I think Dr. Seuss had 17 people or something turn down his manuscript first time out. So, even the best among us, even the best in the history of our medium have, had to struggle and claw their way in. So it'll be no different for you or someone trying to break in, but, stay aggressive. Before I worked at Marvel, I worked as an editor at a company named Resume.com. And what I always talked about with people is there are 3 variables that go into every job search, and one is skill, one is luck, and one is perseverance.
I think that's sadly where we're going to have to wrap up. They're yelling at me saying that we've run out of time, and it's been a great conversation.
I was just going to say that the only thing you control is luck. So, I mean, the only thing you control is perseverance. So stay hungry. Stay hungry.
Well, we've been talking to Warren Simons, who is the editor-in-chief at Valiant Entertainment. I suggest you give their books a chance, give them a look at, and visit valiantentertainment.com to find out more about their characters. You've been watching Comic Culture. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon.